Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Fuel Poverty Action's series of monthly learning sessions. Fuel for Thought, from fuel poverty to climate justice. Fuel for Thought is our space to share research and lived experience, tackle lies, and clear up confusion as we ask and answer questions with experts, activists, and campaigners. As for Fuel Poverty Action, we're a group of, if you don't know us, we're a group of ordinary people fed up with being robbed by greedy energy companies through spiraling bills and rip-off prepayment meters. And one of the things that we believe in at Fuel Poverty Action is that poverty and climate change originate in our households and planet's resources being diverted for soaring profits and life-threatening industries. Nonetheless, we also think that done right, green policy can deliver cheaper and cleaner energy. And that's why this evening, the session is all going to be about shining a light on the injustices that are becoming apparent in the renewable energy transition as it's happening. And we're going to talk about what we can do to ensure wind and solar energy that are being put in place in the UK don't just become the so-called the fossil fuels of the future, if you may, but a true paradigm shift that puts justice for people and the planet at its center. And starting us off this evening is Dr. Brenda Boardman, who's an Emeritus Fellow at the ECI and a visiting professor at the University of Exeter. Thank you so much for being with us, Brenda. Maybe if you want to say a little bit more about yourself, I'm going to share your slides. Just bear with me. Brenda, just unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I like the way that Amal said that the problems are becoming apparent, and I hope that you will understand that this is we're beginning to talk about the interface between us as users and the industry as suppliers. And this is not an interface that we're all good at looking at, but we need to get better. As you can see, I'm still vaguely linked to the Environmental Change Institute and the University of Oxford, although I'm an Emeritus Fellow now. Thanks very much, Amal. Next one. We all know that the cost of electricity is too high. What we also are recognizing is that one of the reasons for this is that at the moment, the system we are using and have been for many years was based on generation from fossil fuels, which have running costs. You've got to buy the gas, or it was coal or oil, in order to make the electricity. And that is something that those running costs fluctuate. What we are now getting is a system with renewables that has no running costs, but it does have high capital expenditure. So the old system that we're still using and the one we need to work towards have very different features. And most people, I don't think there's anybody who disagrees, most people believe this has to change. So therefore, that's why we've got REMA, the Review of Energy Market Arrangements, which started in April 2022. And there are various options for that review, not all of which are being looked at by government. And it's extremely difficult to be certain as to which is the best choice for the fuel pool. I'm going to talk about the fourth one, the green power pool, and I'm not sure whether the others are talking about some of the rest. Thanks, Amal. Now, the amount of electricity that is being generated from renewables is growing quite substantially. In 2023, in all of the electricity in the whole of the UK, 41% came from renewables, wind, solar, hydro, or biomass. And gas was down to 33. This fluctuates. I looked at it at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and the amount of electricity being generated from gas at 2 o'clock was only 14%. And then we've got nuclear, batteries, etc. Thanks, Amal. So not only are renewables growing, but they're getting cheaper. There's a thing called contracts for difference, which is a very useful set of government-led, it's not government-owned entirely, it's a government institution that owns them, auction for new renewables. And they're getting cheaper. So over the last 15 years, the price has gone down from £120 per megawatt hour to 57. The benefit of these contracts, which last for 15 years at a fixed price, is that it enables it's usually wind turbines, but some solar, it enables them to get finance because they've got a contract to purchase the electricity for 15 years. Thank you. So we've got electricity getting cheaper, renewable electricity getting cheaper. I've put a series of numbers on here. It's got a wee bit messed up in the arrangement, but at the moment, the cost of your electricity at your meter is 25p per kilowatt hour. Just forgetting that was at the meter. If you were in the market, gas-fired electricity across the whole year would have been 20 pence per kilowatt hour. That's the equivalent of £200 per megawatt hour. If you just sort of vaguely remember 200 and the bottom figure, the contracts for difference, which is 5.7 pence per kilowatt hour or £57 per megawatt hour. There's 1,000 kilowatt hours in a megawatt hour with nuclear in between. And as you can see, Hinkley C is going to be quite a bit more expensive when and if it comes online than renewables through the contracts for difference. So there's a big range in the choices of electricity that the grid can purchase, both in quantities and, as you can see here, in price. Thanks, Amal. Now, this shows you how our electricity price is worked out on a half-hourly basis. The national grid says it wants to buy the equivalent of a certain amount of megawatt hours, and it's for half an hour tomorrow, and it says which half hour, it's every half hour, and the various suppliers bid to provide a quantity at a price. So you can see the price in the y-axis on the left-hand side. And this is the price of providing the next amount of generation. So the renewables are the cheapest, and I was mentioning £57. Then comes nuclear, interconnectors with Europe, and then the brown ones are various fossil fuels, almost entirely gas now. I don't think we have any coal or oil left. Now, the vertical dotted line is the quantity the national grid actually wants to be able to purchase in that half hour tomorrow. And so the final generator to bid to fill that quantity sets that horizontal marginal cost. And I mentioned £200 could be the figure. That would be all right, except that with the present system, horrifyingly, the marginal cost of that last bit of gas generation, which of course is old and inefficient, otherwise it wouldn't be the last to bid, is the price that everybody is paid. So even though the renewables were coming in at maybe 57, they will get 200. And it is this system, as embodied in this slide, that is the main cause of our hugely expensive electricity. Next, please, Amal. Now, I mentioned that we've got REMA and we're looking at various opportunities. The one that I particularly like is the Green Power Pool. It was devised by an energy economist called Professor Michael Grubb at University College London. And I was delighted when I found out about it because it represents a way of getting the cost of the renewables, the low cost of renewables, into a market that we could then sell to the fuel poor. So you split the present market into those that electricity that's coming from renewables, which is cheap and clean, and the remaining electricity is dirty and expensive. And you sell the clean green power pool to the fuel poor and the disadvantaged. So they've got clean, cheap electricity. But electricity is only one of the fuels that they use. They're still left with expensive gas. So there would have to be a parallel set of policies to switch them from gas into heat pumps and with appropriate insulation, so that they are only using electricity and only using cheap, clean electricity from the green power pool. Thank you. That's me.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Brenda, to our energy market and the renewable energy market. Following on from that, we're going to hear from our very own policy and parliament lead here at Fuel Poverty Action. We have with us Jonathan Bean. Jonathan, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Brenda. That was really helpful background. So as Brenda's explained, we're not getting the benefits of our cheap renewables currently, partly due to this rigged wholesale market. So our plentiful wind and sun is actually generating big profits instead of giving us cheap electricity. I'm going to talk about some of the other related problems and injustices with our electricity market. The first is when it's really windy, we actually generate too much electricity. We need people to actually use more of it to keep the grid balanced. And energy experts call this demand flexibility. Literally, we need to give this energy away, but very few people get this excess energy. Instead, the pricing that most of us pay just stays the same high price as always. So many people can't actually afford to switch it on, which makes no sense because at that point, we actually want people to use more energy. Right now, that cheap or free energy goes to a small number of households, those that have the right technology or have signed up to special deals. They tend to be the more wealthy families, not actually the people that need it most. So instead of this abundant energy reducing energy inequality, it's actually increasing it. And most of this spare energy goes to people with EVs and home batteries. So they charge up for free or at low cost, which saves them a fortune. So they're really, really happy. But at the same time, their neighbours often cannot afford to even turn on the heating or have a warm shower. So not enough effort has gone into giving everyone a fair share of our wind and sun. And that's because they just want to balance the grid. They don't really care about people because our energy system is designed for profit. So what we've now seen is many battery farms popping up, and they take this free energy and turn it into expensive energy to give it to us later in the day. Now, helping people get this free energy requires effort. For example, some people need timers in their homes to make use of this free electricity to, for example, control their hot water tank. That's actually pretty cheap to do, but it's the kind of hassle that the government really can't be bothered to fund. So it's not doing that. Government likes to do the big expensive stuff, as we've heard recently, like giving billions to carbon capture companies. It doesn't want to do the more complicated stuff that actually will help individual households. So instead of giving people this free excess energy, we're also paying wind farms to turn off, which adds billions to our bills and obviously wastes loads of energy as well. So we've got also that plus these battery farms making a profit from it. All this gives right-wing parties and the media a chance to bash renewable energy because they can say that this new renewable system is a waste of money. So we're not only denying people cheap energy, we're also helping the fossil fuel lobby. And most of us also not benefiting from solar. So like today, obviously there's loads of potential for solar, but almost everyone is not benefiting from this this potential solar energy. You know, many big homes are heating their pools today with solar panels, or they're getting paid to feed excess energy back into the grid, whilst others down the road can't even afford to put their washing machine on. Now, everyone should really have access to solar power. Even people in flats should get their fair share of this energy, but very few do. For example, sometimes landlords or even local authorities put solar in, but actually most of the solar money goes to the landlord or the council itself, so it's not actually going to the residents. Also, people without that potential for solar could also be getting solar from the grid. And some people do. So, for example, on some weekends, people that know about certain deals can potentially get cheap energy on summer weekends, but most people don't. So it's really unfair. We could also give some of the excess solar or wind from community energy to people locally, but the system doesn't currently allow this. So that's another thing that needs to be looked at and potentially changed. So much needs to change with our renewable system. The benefits, the huge benefits really that we could be getting are only going to a few companies for profit or to a few households who are generally more affluent. We need it to go to everyone. And that's, you know, a real issue, because if we don't start giving people the benefit of cheap renewables soon, public support's really going to collapse. You know, government's promised us lower bills, but it's not delivering. So it's really running a risk of losing support by not sharing this potential. And that's why we have decided at Fuel Protection to focus in our Energy for All campaign to improve the renewable plan to make it much fairer for everyone. And you know, it's really time that government and Ofgem starts listening to this before it's too late and we lose public support and the opportunity to tackle fuel poverty. That's probably all I'm going to say for now. We can obviously talk about some of this stuff in the discussion. So I'm going to pass on to Fiona.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, and next up is Fiona Gilmore, who's the founder and director of Suffolk Energy Action Solutions, or SEAS, which is a community group campaigning against the making of the Friston and Suffolk Coast into an energy hub. Fiona, thanks for being with us.
Hello, Amal. Thanks very much for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. And I would like to say that this is the first time I've spoken on this particular platform. And I'm very pleased to, because I want to discuss a macro opportunity here that could really help tackle fuel poverty. And I believe that everyone has a right to affordable water, clean water, and affordable electricity. And we have to look at a much more thoughtful, strategic master plan for energy infrastructure in the future than that we have been dealt over the last 20 years. And essentially, we need some profound reforms in Britain in order to bring this about. And I'm going to talk to you about what I think the reforms are, but just to explain how on earth I got involved in this, because I'm a modern linguist by training. I'm not an engineer, and I've been on a very steep learning curve. But I'm a strategic consultant by background, looking at economic and environmental, socioeconomic development, working in a lot of post-conflict countries such as Sierra Leone, Rwanda, and Lebanon. And so I apply my strategic training to looking at what the macro trends are here, and also how we can really benefit properly from this great gift that we have of wind, and offshore wind in particular. I became a campaigner in 2019 when I discovered that National Grid was hoping to build the biggest energy infrastructure hub in Europe, 3 miles from a thriving tourism resort called Aldeburgh on the Suffolk coast, very close to Minsmere, which is one of the most successful, fabulously important bird sanctuaries that we have, and also right next door to North Warren, which is the second oldest RSPB sanctuary in the country. And I was horrified to hear what their plans were. They were going to build across cables, across SSSI. They were going to go through national landscapes, vital wetlands, which we now know are even more valuable than tropical rainforests. And I decided to research and find out, using my background, benchmarking the best in class. And they were Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and Denmark, where they were building offshore grids, modular offshore grids, where you can pull energy at sea. You can take it directly using HVDC cables more efficiently to brownfield pre-industrialized sites closer to demand. And they have master plans because their companies, Elia, Tenet, they're nationalized. They're run by the government, over 51% control, and they have always been like that during this period of offshore energy strategic planning. And my own belief, having looked at them, benchmarked them, that the right way forward for this country is not only to have great British energy, but that should be become more important, and it should have over 51% control of the transmission infrastructure at sea. And we should take away the monopoly from a publicly quoted company. Most people in this country mistakenly think National Grid is a cozy national company like the BBC. Well, it's far from it. It's publicly quoted, and its major shareholders are BlackRock and organizations in America and the UAE. And we have looked at a better master plan for Britain, where we could save £6 billion as a minimum for Britain. And in East Anglia alone, over 2 billion, we think actually it could be nearer to 4 billion. If we opt for an offshore grid, because it will reduce the onshore infrastructure by over 50%, because you will no longer need to build those substations on land. It's very old-fashioned thinking, the proliferation of substations in rural parts of our country. It's incredibly antiquated. When you only had 1 or 2 wind farms, it was fine. You could get away with cowboys doing that. But now that we are talking about a huge proportion of our energy coming from offshore wind, we have to up our game, and we have to learn from the best. And so we are proposing a series of reforms to do that. And I just want to show you, I'm sorry, I'm on my phone here, but perhaps you can see that we have a map here, which is the North Sea corridor. And we use a map where the sea, the North Sea, is the protagonist, not the British Isles. And we see the corridor being critical to the future. It's a north-south corridor as well as an east-west for imports, exports. And we see that that corridor should be developed very strategically with energy hubs at places such as Grain, where there are no dark skies, no bitterns, no marsh harriers, as there are near us here in coastal Suffolk. And so our recommendations on radical reforms are that National Grid Electricity Transmission Operator, NGET, should be renationalised as quickly as possible. Can we afford to do that? That will be the question, but we must find a way to afford to do it. It should be controlled and run strategically, just as NESO is now renationalised, which is the strategic arm. It is absurd and ludicrous that we allow the electricity transmission operator to be operated by a developer that whose duty is to its shareholders ahead of the interests of Britain and our environment, our wildlife, our biodiversity, and our communities. So renationalisation of NGET, Ofgem needs to be radically reappraised because at the moment its criteria for judging projects is based on consumer price alone. It needs to have a much more thoughtful, intelligent look at midterm investments because, as we heard from Professor Boardman earlier, the offshore renewable energy business, it has huge capital investments up front. We need to be able to finance that with an anticipatory financial scheme that motivates by having primary and secondary investors. And there is currently no obligation to carry out comparative option assessments. If a developer's project meets the financial requirements, Ofgem does not need to look any further or wider, and that is why we result in short-term consumer price-led decisions being taken. So we recommend a holistic cost-benefit analysis is conducted on every project. The Nick Windsor report of 23 was seminal, and we believe that this government, who promised a green agenda, who promised strategic thinking, and we applaud that, we encourage them to really take it very seriously. When Nick Windsor said that communities should be consulted at the outset, not when it's too late for projects, we think that is absolutely right, and that is what happens in the Netherlands and Belgium. And in the Netherlands and Belgium, they don't have the delays caused by judicial reviews that we have in this country because the communities are totally supportive when they choose places like Rotterdam and Zeebrugge, pre-industrialized sites for their hubs. It does not make sense for Britain to choose tourism resorts and bird sanctuaries for our energy hubs. And if we can demonopolize the market and create competition, we will find that we will have much better value from our developers. Finally, because I must stick to my 7 minutes, and I think Amal is warning me that I'm nearly there, we should think about the idea that HMG should be both facilitator and master planner, and that we need to get energy economists on board who are neutral, objective, and expert. And if we can do all of these things, we believe that the current projects, for example, that are being proposed in coastal Suffolk are disjointed, outdated, and needlessly damaging. We can halt these, pause. There is no embarrassment about that. And we can achieve net zero by 2032, 2033. We don't think there's anything magical about 2030. We think it is more important that we get the right framework for the midterm and the long term. Sustainable development is absolutely essential. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Fiona. Lots to unpack there. For the discussion. Brilliant. Next up, we're going to hear from Gary Jack, who's one of the founding members of Highland People's Power and a board member. And is going to talk to us about Highland People's Power. Gary, thanks for being with us this evening.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us, Amal. Yes, I'm one of the trustees of Highland People's Power. There is a PowerPoint with this, Amal.
Yes, I'm just getting that up.
All right, yeah. Yeah, so it's basically speaking about Highland People's Power and why it's set up, and also the why we need community energy. Next slide, please. Yeah, like most organisations, there's a pivotal point where something just doesn't seem right, and organisations are set up to try and rectify that. This news item came up on STV when the cost of living crisis started way back in 22-23. as you can see from the news item, they were handing out a record number of blankets to people who couldn't actually afford their electricity bills. And that was in Caithness, which is really high up in the Highlands. And that's where they were producing 10 times the amount of electricity they actually need in Caithness itself. So all the electricity, all these wind farms were being producing masses of electricity, which was being exported down south. And it transpires that the local community weren't enjoying any benefits from the generation of that renewable electricity. Next slide. So there was obviously something wrong there. So we felt that we should try and rectify that. So we set up Highland People's Power. There was a 2-year period that we had citizens' assemblies and various petitions and so forth, and then last November we actually set up Highland People's Power and launched it officially. We became a community benefit society that we were advised that that was the best vehicle to actually manage and own a member's company. And then the society was set up to increase community energy ownership in the Highlands to benefit the local people, and especially in Caithness, so they can actually afford and benefit from the cheap renewable energy that's being produced. Next slide, please. Yeah, the Highlands is quite a sort of amplified situation of the current situation in renewables in the UK. In the Highlands, we have abundance of natural assets. We have masses of open spaces. We have some of the highest winds, rain, and water lochs and rivers and so forth. But none of that seems to be actually filtering through to the community. So we're actually fairly poor when it comes to benefiting from these. Next slide, please. And the main reasons for that disparity and sort of being asset rich and community poor is the pricing system that's been mentioned earlier by, I think it was Brenda, which doesn't benefit the place where the electricity is actually being generated. The other thing is fuel poverty is very high in the Highlands. I think it's 38% fuel poverty and 24% for extreme fuel poverty, which is an outrage when the Highlands is the place that the majority of renewable energy is probably being produced in the UK. A lot of the fuel poverty is down to poor housing as well and inefficient heating systems, and incomes in the Highlands are far lower than most places in the UK as well. So there is a community benefit scheme set up to try and stop this disparity, but it's outdated. It came out in 2013. And it's just voluntary on developers whether they actually use it or not. And sometimes when it is actually used, we'll find that it's not distributed properly. Some communities have benefited from community benefits massively, but others haven't. So there's some communities that don't have the community benefit coming in, that they're maybe not near a wind farm, so they won't get any community benefit. So they may be maybe a deprived area in Inverness, and they're never going to get community benefit. So it's sometimes going to the wrong locations, and it's not equally dispersed. And there's only currently less than 1% in community-owned energy in renewables project. I think it's 0.74% or something like that. Next slide, please. I put this slide in because it sort of highlights what I think it was Fiona was saying, that we should be nationalising and having more public-owned energy. This is a sort of the top 10 countries who are transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables. And out of these 10 countries, 9 of them have huge percentages of companies that are actually publicly owned, and the only one who doesn't have one is the actual UK. So the UK is well behind in the renewables field when it comes to publicly or community-owned ownership. Next slide, please. So the current community benefit system is, as I said, outdated. It's not designed to give community ownership to the local communities. It's more designed for big developers, and they have no obligation to give community benefit to any of the local communities. It's a voluntary scheme, and currently it's £5,000 per megawatt installed for onshore wind farms. That figure was derived in 2010, so inflation-wise, that figure has devalued grossly. There's no community benefit payments for offshore wind at all or any other form of renewables. It's only onshore wind farms. Next one. So our vision was to try and create a better system, especially in the Highlands, one that works for local communities, consumers, and local businesses, and the environment as well. And making sure that as much of the revenue that's created stays within the Highlands and local people benefit from it. Next one. Right. Yeah, so our sort of main aims are obviously to reduce energy prices, so local residents can find their way out of fuel poverty, as I said, create green jobs, create more infrastructure and services and biodiversity, which the Highlands are sorely lacking. And lower emissions, and hopefully help Highland Council achieve their net zero plan, which I think is 2045. They're trying to go net zero. Next slide, please. These are some of the potential development options. Local community share offers, which one of their board members has just been involved in. One in Dundee, a big solar farm that was community share offer. Partnerships, joint ventures with Highland Council and private developers, and doing ventures ourselves. We're currently looking at putting PVs on community buildings to make them more affordable for the actual community halls to run their buildings, because during the cost of living increase, a lot of halls almost went bankrupt because they couldn't afford the fuel costs. Next slide, please. Yeah, so HPP, is formed with currently five board members for a wide range of experience, from consultants to councillors and various people working within the renewables industry. And then we have working groups, probably about 12 or 15 of us, all on a voluntary basis, that they work on certain projects. Next slide, please. So our membership we've tried to spread it throughout the Highlands because it is such a large area. It's actually bigger than Wales. So we split it into 9 sub-regions to make sure that we get everybody's feelings throughout certain areas in the Highlands. There's different issues in different areas, so we're trying to get board members or working group members within the 9 areas. I think we have members within 7 of these areas at the moment. Next slide, please. Yeah, and that was 4 of our board members at our recent launch in November. That's it. Just next slide, so thank you. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Gary, and highlighting the need for community energy. And last but not least, in our lineup of speakers, we're going to hear from Ruth, Ruth London, who is a founding member of Fuel Poverty Action and one of the organization's directors. Ruth, good to have you here. Back, yeah, I should say.
Okay, I have to apologize in advance because I've been madly, completely rewriting what I was going to say. I think most people here probably know the main things that I had in mind, so I'm skipping them. We obviously start from what Gary was saying. You look at this picture and you see there is something here wrong. It's something wrong here. And I think that's obvious to more and more people now. We started our campaign for Energy for All, which I just say a word about because I imagine most people here know about it, but some may not. The idea is that every family, every household should get the energy that they need free to cover the basics, that is heating, lighting, charging, disability appliances, connectivity and so on, and then pay more for energy beyond that, and that the money will come from profits from energy companies and from this higher tariff on excess use by the super rich, really, who use a very high proportion of the energy that is needed. It's a modest demand. It's much less than what we all had in mind some years ago when we realized the possibilities of renewable energy and the possibilities of robots and computers doing all the work. And we all thought we were going to sit back and just basically, once a week go and tend some machines to take care of the work, and we would have time for our relationships and, go swimming and make love and have a good life. And we're not asking for that now. We're asking for something pretty basic, which is that nobody should be freezing cold or hungry because they can't pay their bills in their own home. So that's the basics of Energy for All, to provide a basic kind of security. However, when we launched it a few years ago, we were not really dealing with the question of where energy came from. And over that period, that was changing very rapidly, so that more and more of it is renewable. And that changes the economics of where the money for the tariff comes from. But more importantly, it means that we have to actually look at what is happening with renewable energy and make sure that it's not a con and that it is going to people who are in fuel poverty or not in fuel poverty, but just ordinary people, and not just people who are, rich enough to have huge batteries and electric vehicles. Not that everybody with an EV is rich, but a lot are. And as Jonathan pointed out, that leads to the right-wing narrative that says that, anything green is not really for ordinary people. And we have to make sure that that is actually not just countered, but that it's not actually true. What we're up against is an industry which is being perpetrated on the same kind of model that is what we've had so far. And a lot of it is actually the same companies that are developing fossil fuels, but where it's not, it's companies that have the same principles. And you have, changes of specifics, but not really of kind. For instance, instead of mining coal, you might be mining lithium, but the conditions for the miners may be at least as bad. And the way the industry is set up is set up to, entirely on the basis of profit, as Fiona's pointed out, and not at all to meet human need, which is what Energy for All is about. And that is the source of what we're calling the pivot in what we're working on Energy for All, to make sure that the neat little arrangements that they have to make sure that nothing actually benefits ordinary people are identified and dealt with. And that requires the work of the kinds of people who are here, who are actually doing that work now. But it also requires some coordination. And that's what I think our campaign can help to provide, to put all these things together and show that it is a pattern. It's not just, they're accidentally doing something not very sensible here. They're accidentally not doing something very sensible, accidentally on purpose. And that has to be confronted, in itself. I wanted to mention just a couple of other things. We have to pay attention ultimately, and this is not something that we're really working on very much yet, not only to where the energy comes from, but where the energy goes. And there are a few sort of crucial things that come into that. One is AI, because already all the extra wind production in Ireland is being gobbled up by AI data centers, leaving nothing for anyone else. There's the military, which uses a huge amount of energy and produces huge amounts of carbon emissions. And they are decarbonizing to a certain extent, but even if they're using renewable energy, it's still using energy. And the energy that they use is needed for people to keep warm. And let alone what the results of the wars are, and the cost of the war machine even before there's a war. And we know that the government's project along, I see now with Rosebank, I don't know if people have seen the news today, absolutely horrifying. The government is now planning to massively increase that investment in the military, which is also an investment in energy at the expense of people who need it. And the last one is waste. And that is so ingrained, so integral to what we expect of our lives, that, our housing leaks heat, that our heating systems don't function properly and therefore use much more than they need to use, that people are using cars because there's no buses, that people are using planes because they're cheaper than trains, that obsolescence is built in, so everything has to be replaced, that fashions come and go in a moment, that houses are built to last 40 years, that the rich use this massive amount on flying their private jets, that a huge amount of work goes into bureaucracies and just making everybody work for nonsense, and that nothing works. And those are not small costs. that is an economy that is set up not for need and not for pleasure, but solely for reproducing this insane system that we've got. And we will ultimately have to confront where the energy goes as well as where it comes from. Thanks. Sorry, it was very off the cuff, that was.
That's great, Ruth. Thank you very much. I think this is a great way in which to segue into our conversation. So it's time to hand over to everyone else that's joined here this evening for your comments, your questions, your clarifications, your contributions. And I also invite, nonetheless, I also invite speakers. If you have questions you want to ask to other people, or if you want to, there are things you want to discuss, hear other people's perspectives on, please also speak up. Just for the ease of moderation, if you want to come in, just please raise your virtual hand on Zoom, which you can find under the reactions in the bottom of the Zoom window. If you look up React and then raise your hand. Yeah, who wants to start us off? We have just over half an hour to discuss. Jonathan, yeah.
So I'll just chip in with a quick one to get us going. I just wondered if Fiona could just clarify on the cost and kind of the bill side, because I think you were talking about like there's a big potential cost saving of billions, medium to longer term, but there might be Ofgem kind of looking at things from a very short term cost minimization point of view. So I was just wondering how that looks in practice and whether that trade-off can be avoided so we don't end up with high bills short term but low bills long term. Could we kind of smooth it in a way to make it to keep bills down that people are really struggling with today and maybe spread the costs on the longer term?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. The way you can obviously save money is if you're reducing the onshore infrastructure. There are big capital investments in making offshore platforms. We're not talking about islands to start with, but ultimately there could be more artificial islands. Belgium and Denmark are looking at those opportunities. They're very expensive, but you can start with offshore platforms. And these offshore platforms can convert your electricity close to the shoreline so that you then just take your electricity directly to a hub that is on an industrial site. And if you do that, you are minimizing the waste, the excess energy, if you like, because it's flexible, it's an offshore grid. So that energy can be redirected, and it's a true grid, a lattice network. And that also gives you a resilience in terms of security in the future, that if we were ever attacked in terms of our energy infrastructure, if you were to put 30% of your electricity going through one hub, in this case, coastal Suffolk, where Sizewell C is and where they're talking about bringing Sea Link and Lion Link and potentially other projects, there is a risk, particularly with the easternmost part of the country, we're the closest to Moscow, if you like, that you are endangering, you are making yourselves very vulnerable. Whilst if you have this lattice network at sea, you have flexibility that if one of the cables was to go down, you would have many other ways that electricity could be redirected. And so we're looking at it in terms of price, that we think we love some of the ideas that have been discussed today. And we certainly think it is absurd, ludicrous that our pricing system is pegged to gas. It just does not make sense. And the sooner that changes, the better. But I really like the idea of targeting particularly those people who have a right to basic electricity for their basic needs. I think it is absolutely essential. But I come back to the way you save this money is by pooling energy at sea, by reducing the onshore infrastructure. And the other benefit is you don't destroy the tourism sector, which is the mainstay of coastal Suffolk. We have poverty, by the way, in coastal Suffolk. People may think of Aldborough and Southwold as being wealthy towns. Well, that's not the case. I believe that 41% of the children in Southwold are having access to free school meals, as an example. There is a lot of poverty here, and we should also be benefiting. And I just want to say one final thing. What is most, I think, criminal is that these developers are allowed to compulsory purchase land. They're allowed to build these converters and substations, 80 football pitches of concrete monoliths in our case. And people who have saved up all their lives to buy their first home, and I know of two men, vulnerable men living on their own. They both committed suicide. They didn't know each other, but it was the last straw when the estate agent came round and said, your house is valueless. And there is no compensation for those people whose gardens look over 3 substations or 3 converter stations. There is no compensation. Now, this is theft. This is theft. I have robbed you of the value of your house. Morally, I am obliged to compensate you. And yet there is no compensation. There is no law demanding it. Now that has to change before we have more suicides.
Thanks, Fiona. Jonathan, do you want to come back in on that? On that?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think we should give other people a chance to chip in with some questions.
Sure. Brenda.
I'll give way if somebody wants to keep on the same subject, but what I was going to do is ask Gary a question. One of the options that are being discussed for the revised energy market is called zonal. And the whole of the British Isles would be 12 regions, and each region would be responsible for generating its own electricity and selling it within its boundaries. And Greg Jackson of Octopus is extremely enthusiastic about this. And if you get The Guardian, he had a whole page advert the other day. Now, one of the regions would be Scotland. I don't know whether it's one of the 12 or 2 of the 12 or whatever. And obviously that would be Gary's patch. I think I'm against zoning because it would be much cheaper your electricity would be cheaper in Scotland because they generate a lot of their own electricity. But that would take away the incentive for more companies to come in and do their own renewable developments. If you live in the south, and goodness knows how this interacts with Fiona and her issues in Suffolk. If you live in the south where we have very little renewable energy, then the price is very likely to go up because that would give an incentive to new generation and new grid, etc., because there isn't enough of it. And all of this is very delayed. It requires the market to start responding and doing things. So it wouldn't mean any reduction in prices before 2030 at the best. So I just wondered if Gary's looked at this and if our Scottish friends have any views on whether they want zoning or not.
Yeah, there's various thoughts on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and up in the Highlands, there is some people that are keen on it and some that aren't. It has its good points and its bad points, and I take on board what you're saying is prices would be more expensive further south. That we're sort of concentrating on community energy as such because that sort of negates the need for repricing sort of with the system that you're talking about. If community energy is for the local community, so to a certain extent it's taken a load off the grid, so the infrastructure doesn't need to be as big as well. It's also generating income for the community itself, so there can be heating payments, which some communities are currently doing. One community gave each resident £1,000 for their heating allowance last winter. So there's other ways around it that doesn't involve the repricing system, which is very complicated, although it does have some benefits, but it does have some disadvantages.
Does that mean, Gary, sorry, Amal, does that mean, Gary, that you are allowed to sell what you generate to your own residents?
We would have to, in certain circumstances, when we're talking about, we're doing a scheme just now that we're putting solar panels on community buildings and we're selling it direct to the community buildings. But when it comes in bigger schemes, when we're going to do joint ventures, it will have to be sold to the grid. But as I say, we can maybe make allowances to local residents of heating allowances and things like that.
Thank you, Brenda and Gary. Pamela, good to see you, have you here this evening. You want to come in?
Hi, thank you, Amal. Yeah, I'd be very interested to hear from the experts here tonight about how you think a just transition can be achieved for people who have no alternative but to heat their homes using fossil fuels because they're living completely off grid. Boat dwellers without a permanent mooring are completely nomadic. We don't have any connections to the grid. We might occasionally spend a few days on a mooring where there is an electricity pillar, but on the whole, we need to be completely self-sufficient and carry all our fuel or collect it as we travel around the waterways. So we have a tank of diesel to drive the boat and sometimes for heating as well. Coal or wood for a solid fuel stove to run that in winter. LPG gas for cooking, sometimes solid fuel for cooking instead of that. And obviously a lot of us do have solar, and solar is great at this time of year, but it doesn't provide all the electricity we need in winter for lighting and running water pumps and similar sorts of things. So what are people's opinions about how we can have a just transition, and how our community can prevent ourselves from being effectively evicted by our homes becoming uninhabitable in winter?
Thank you, Pamela. Yes, Brenda, you want to come in on that?
I'll give a small contribution, Pamela. What is happening in Oxford is that beside the canal, they're putting in electric charging points. So if, for instance, you had PV and a battery, that would help you in the summer, and then in the winter, you would be able to charge up your battery at the charging point beside a mooring. I don't know whether that would be sufficient, but it sounds like a solution.
That's useful as far as it goes, but each of us would probably only spend a maximum of 14 days in Oxford over a whole year. You can't actually moor for 14 days in the centre of Oxford. I've recently been in the centre of Oxford on my boat, and Canal and River Trust are really keen for people like us not to spend very much time in central Oxford. I know the electricity pillars that you're talking about, and they are on a mooring which I think is time limited to 48 hours. It might be 7 days, I'm not sure. But yes, the kind of electricity installations that you're talking about, they do exist, but they only exist in very particular places, and they're generally moorings where you can't even stay for 14 days. We are entitled by law to stay in any one place for 14 days, but then unless it's reasonable to stay longer, we have to move to a different place. We can come back to a place, but not very often. So it's I don't know if you would agree or not. In my opinion, it's completely impractical to run electricity cables along the entire towpaths of the waterways and canals and rivers. You know, it's just it would be prohibitively expensive, and it wouldn't really be in keeping with the rural nature of a lot of waterways anyway. So, you know, I'm interested in how people think we can get around that. You know, that a lot of the alternatives to fossil fuels that are good for the settled housed community, how can any of those technologies be adapted to be used on a completely mobile boat or caravan, etc.? We're not the only community that lives off grid.
Thanks, Pamela. Yeah, it sounds like there's a systemic issue as well as an infrastructural one. But I think Jonathan wanted to come in on the question.
Yeah, I had a bit of a similar point, but I suppose my feeling is that we are investing a lot of money and effort into quite a lot of difficult challenges. I mean, we're spending, an average of £30,000 per house retrofitting it, for example. And it feels to me that we're not investing enough in this particular challenge compared to what we are with other things. And obviously we're putting EV chargers, spending huge amounts of money putting EV chargers all over the place. So it just feels to me that a combination, like a bit of investment and focus on these particular challenges is potentially missing. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a fund in the money that government's putting aside in terms of, say, the Warm Homes Plan to address this. So, for example, that's an obvious gap. Of the 13.2 billion, there should be a chunk of money put aside to meet this challenge. So I think that, maybe that's something we can push government for, to say, well, now there's a pot of money to deal with all the different homes people have, then we should put some more money, investment and effort into that. And I think, it might include rule changes. So some of the rule changes, the rules that you have to work around, they'll need to change probably to give you more flexibility to be able to make use of different charging stations, etc. So to me, it doesn't feel like it's an impossible challenge, but I just think that government hasn't really put enough focus or effort into meeting the challenge.
Can I come back on that briefly?
Yeah.
You're talking about rule changes. If you're talking about rule changes, changes to rules imposed by the government through Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, yes, we've had some success lobbying that department. On the other hand, if you're talking about so-called rule changes by Canal and River Trust, for example, or other navigation authorities, that is an extremely hard nut to crack. Navigation authorities, well, Canal and River Trust in particular, will not want our community staying any longer than we already stay in particular places, even if it's to get the benefit of electric recharging points for cars or whatever the technology might be. They will not want us to do that. They basically want to get rid of our community, and their they're imposing, ever more draconian movement requirements on our community every year. I mean, I don't see them willingly changing any of their so-called rules.
Yeah, no, I see that challenge, but it feels like that's what's got to give as part of the solution. I think without them adapting to the challenges, I think the solution will become much harder. So it's a combination of things of investment in the solutions, but also they will need to be more flexible. So I don't know what we can do potentially to put pressure on them to be more flexible, because that has to be part of the solution in my mind.
Thank you. That's a very interesting idea, and I'll take that away and try and work out some ways that campaigns external to our own campaign can put pressure on, particularly Canal and River Trust. I mean, the problem is that if you don't travel in the way that they think people should be travelling, you're liable to lose your home because your boat can be seized because they deem you to be non-compliant with the law. So it's not as if people have some very strong negative incentives to move more than they maybe choose to move. On the other hand, some of us don't want to stay in any one place for very long at a time anyway, and we'd rather sort of be on the move every few days, even if it's just a couple of miles up the canal.
Thanks a lot, Pamela. Great to have you
Thank you.
this evening. Ruth, you had a question as well?
Yeah, it was for Brenda. A couple of questions really, but the main thing is, Brenda, you probably decided there wasn't time to go into it, but I'd like to see if you can give us a little summary of the green power pool. And I also noticed that you said what you were proposing was kind of dependent on heat pumps and insulation, which are obviously very big nuts to crack. So I don't know how that's integrated in what you're proposing.
Well, Ruth, there's two bits to that. First of all, there's the creation of the green power pool. And as I said, this is the brainchild of Professor Michael Grubb of University College London. I could put it in the chat if you like, but that's one of the things you want to read. It's a long document. Can you see it, or is it back to front?
No, it's not back to front, but it's a bit small. Separating electricity from gas prices.
From gas
Right.
prices through
Yeah.
green power pools. And it's part of his Navigating the Energy Climate Crisis series. I can send it to Amal later, and he can circulate it with the recording. And there are two or three things to sort of stress with that. In my opinion, if Michael Grubb says it can work, it will work. It could work. That's not the same as saying I think it could work. It's because Michael says it could work that I have faith in it. And he also says that it could come about very quickly. I mean, within a year, because it's just making an adjustment to the existing market. It's taking the existing market and separating it into two, so that the part of it is the green power pool, and the rest is the dirty electricity that's come from other sources. And where you put nuclear is up to somebody else to decide. And that would be that's not new regulation. It's just an adjustment to the existing market. So it would be very easy to do. Unfortunately, DESNZ has decided that they don't think it's a practical solution, so they're not considering it. And one of the things that I think is very upsetting so far, I expected the Labour Party, when they won the election, to start issuing some new guidance / rules for the REMA discussion. And as far as I can see, this hasn't happened. So I think we're going to end up with, if we're not careful, a continuation of that marginal cost pricing, perhaps linked to zones, perhaps linked to something else. But and I know Ed Miliband is under pressure to make a decision soon, and it's really very sad if there's a good opportunity that is no longer going to be considered. But that's the provision of the Green Power Pool. The bit that I added on, Ruth, about heat pumps and insulation was because a large part of our bills is for heating using gas. And we won't help the fuel poor if all we do is revise the electricity price without looking at the rest of their fuel consumption. And so therefore, as there are opportunities to replace gas with an electric heating system, i.e. a heat pump, then I added it in to show that we could, if we got a green power pool or we got cheaper electricity, we could work towards a system whereby the fuel poor in particular, through the Warm Homes Plan or whatever, are given energy efficient homes and therefore taken off gas, which we've all got to get rid of, but they would be given a priority, so that they could then all be on this cheap source of electricity. It was a way of, if you like, carrying through help to the fuel poor for both gas and electricity eventually. Does that sort of answer your question?
Have you given any thought to how the Green Power Pool might work with Energy for All?
With both your Energy for All and my Green Power Pool, there is this horrid question, targeting. You may, I don't know, I think at times, if I've understood your Energy for All, it goes to everybody. With the Green Power Pool, it would be targeted on the fuel poor. There is actually such a lot of renewable electricity out there at the moment that we could give it to a lot of households. It doesn't have to be very carefully targeted. But Michael's view on that question is that there's a lot of energy intensive industry and small businesses that also need some support, and so therefore should also get a cheap form of electricity if it's available. So this would be some political debates as to who would get to the Green Power Pool, how far up the income scale it would go, and therefore targeting.
Jonathan, you want to comment on that? Or sorry, Ruth, are you just having a thought?
Yeah, just I mean, in terms of a basic free element, would that be part of the Green Power Pool?
I think it could be. It depends on how you would expect that to be paid for. Would you expect it to be paid for by the other Green Power Pool purchasers, most of whom are fuel poor, or would you expect it to be paid for by the people buying the dirty electricity? Or a windfall profit on a windfall tax on the profits or whatever. It would depend entirely how you felt it should be paid for, Ruth.
Okay.
Is that a start?
Thanks, that's helpful. That's helpful. Thank you.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, it is based on the same basic logic that there's a certain amount of cheap energy available, but a limited amount, which is like the first block of energy in a rising block tariff. And then there's, higher levels of energy consumption require more expensive sources and therefore should be priced at higher rates. So both Green Power Pool and Energy for All both start with that basic reality of the market, which is we've got a certain amount of cheap, clean energy, and then higher levels are more expensive. So I think they do line up quite closely.
I mean, one of the interesting, sorry, Lorraine, I'm keeping you off this, but one of the interesting things in this is if we've got rid of that dreadful marginal cost pricing system, just how expensive is the rest of it? It's not at all clear. I mean, one of the schemes is you pay as you bid. So if you bid 57, you get 57. If you bid 75, you get 75. The so-called clever economists say that that would be a system where there would be a lot of gaming. So everybody would know that British Gas would come in at 200. So even though they could sell it to you at 57, they bid at 199, so that they're up there. Whether that gaming would occur or not, who knows? It's way beyond my ability to think that through. And certainly one economist, a guy up in Edinburgh, said that the whole gaming principle was nonsense. So, but meanwhile, something has got to happen soon, and it isn't happening. And if only it happened, it would reduce the price of electricity for all of us substantially.
Thank you, Brenda. Lorraine, nice to see you this evening.
Hi. Yeah, thank you, everybody. It's been really, really interesting tonight. And I think more than ever, I've just wanted to face palm most of the night. Just our system is just insane, isn't it? So one of the questions I have, there's a lot of talk about, retrofitting and lots of different responses, which have been really, really interesting. My question's about the people transition and getting skills, and do we think there are enough people to actually implement this just transition to to a more fairer fuel system? And I understand that some things can be done without extra changes or extra staffing or anything else, but some things obviously are going to need a big input of people, and whether we need to think about training, apprenticeships and things like that, or whether you think this can be managed somehow. So I'd be interested to know everybody's thoughts.
Thanks, Lorraine. Yes, Brenda.
To say, the skills aren't there, Lorraine, and more importantly, the framework to ensure that skilled people are made available isn't there. We've had a lot of problems with installers who are not well qualified trying to put in energy efficiency improvements and making a really dreadful mess of it. It's appalling to know that you could decide tomorrow that you were going to be a builder, and you could set up your own building company and nobody would mind. You might have one day's experience. You're not regulated. You don't have to be part of a trade association or anything like that. There's master builders and that, but you don't have to join them. Whereas if, for instance, you wanted to be an electrician or a plumber, then there's huge qualifications that you have to comply with, and trade associations that can disqualify you. I don't think they do very often, but they can. So Lorraine, we've got a system which is malfunctioning in several dimensions. Sorry.
Thank you for that, Brenda. And I'm also gonna, some of you will have noticed I put some links in the chat. Lorraine, I'm also going to point you to the Fuel Poverty Action Fuel for Thought YouTube playlist, on which we have all of our sessions, including one on retrofitting, where we discussed this very question that you're asking. Ruth.
Just a simple suggestion. The national grid, it's true, people don't know. People think it's a cozy nationalized company. I think if people know it's BlackRock and other American companies like that, I think it will make a difference to their perception. It might be useful to you in Suffolk, Fiona, but I think we should seize our opportunities to make clear what the grid is.
Very good point, Ruth. Unfortunately, it seems as if we've lost Fiona. So she can't hear you right now. But
Okay.
thank you for making that point. It's true. I also had no idea that BlackRock was a shareholder in the National Grid.
Maybe it can be passed on to her.
Yes, yeah. Fine. Well, hopefully she'll come back in. I think it might just have been her phone that timed out as she left. She seemed to have left the room. We still have just a couple of minutes for any last minute comments. We haven't heard from Ellen, Jackie, Helen, Richard. If you would like to comment or just say a thought that you've had. Yes, Ellen, thank you.
Just to draw people's attention to the Retrofit for the Future campaign, particularly in response to Lorraine's comments, and people recognising that we don't at the moment have a skilled workforce for retrofit, or at least we do have a tiny skilled workforce, but and nearly all working in micro companies in the private sector. One of the things that I know, the organisation I work with is a campaign against climate change trade union group, and we campaign for this labour to be in the form of direct labour organisations, so people employed directly by local authorities as the main. Now, obviously, there'll be a diversity of employment models, but that as the core model, which would enable much more collaboration with trainers in the further education sector, and we need the establishment of standards and qualifications that apply across the sector, and much more investment in that training, because at the moment it is the training itself is fragmentary. People are trained in a building skill, they're not trained in the way that provides an integrated understanding of the thermodynamics of the whole house and the different skills that go into that. So there's a massive body of work out there on that, and campaigns, but I think this is one of the areas where trade union organising needs to push as well. But yeah, just suggest that people look up that campaign and the demands that are associated with it, and get involved with that as well. I'll find the link for the campaign.
I think Jonathan might have just put
it's done. Yeah,
oh, you got it
in the chat. Yeah.
Thanks very much for that plug, Ellen, and for talking a little bit more about retrofitting. Really appreciated. Before we go, I also just want to draw attention that even though Fiona has left us, she did in the chat send an invitation to sign up and register as an interested party to object National Grid's needlessly destructive plans at a website called offshoreforshore.com. Just find the link for that. There is. Maybe it's something we feel we could do of your poverty action, be mutually supportive. It's not making a link, but if you copy paste that into your browser, you'll be able to get to that window. It's just gone 8. So I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you everyone for joining and participating in the session. And yeah, a big thank you again to our speakers for making it so informative. Yeah, great to have you here. Please take action by signing our manifesto or pledging your support to the manifesto as an organization. Consider if you are just a supporter of FPA currently, consider becoming a member, and also please let us know how you found the session. All those links I've put in the chat already. Our next one will be on the 3rd Thursday of July, so that's penciled in for the 24th, and we're looking to sort of continue this conversation about renewable energy, but taking the scope to a bit more of a global angle, and looking at things like mining, minerals, and also struggles that are happening the world over. yeah, in order to continue the conversation about how to make renewables into the just transition that we actually want and need, and not just continued needless greed and destruction, which is already way out. So yeah, make sure you pencil that into your diaries, and I hope to see you next month. Yeah, I really appreciate if you unmute yourself and turn your camera on just to say good evening and see you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your
Night.
time. It's
Thank
really great.
you.
Bye. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.